I'm KeithOlbermann, and this is The Resistance. I call for a federal grand jury to be impaneled to determine if crimes have been committed by the Trump presidential campaign, the Trump presidential transition team, and now the Trump presidential administration involving Russian attempts to influence American democracy, specifically the presidential election of 2016. I call for that grand jury to look specifically to the actions of Trump attorney Michael Cohen, Trump business associate Felix Sater, Trump's former campaign manager Paul Manafort, and former national security advisor Michael Flynn, specifically in regards to contacts with agents of the Russian government in 2016 and 2017. I call on that grand jury to hear evidence as to whether or not indictment should be returned against White House officials, Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, or Press Secretary Sean Spicer, or others. I call on that grand jury to ascertain specifically whether Priebus or others violating the 2009 Department of Justice procedure memo requiring that White House contact with the FBI about investigations be made only by the President, Vice President, White House counsel, or Principal Deputy White House counsel is evidence of prohibited criminal behavior such as aiding and abetting, conspiracy, or misprision of a felony. I call on that grand jury to determine whether indictment should be returned against House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes, Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Chairman Richard Burr, and officials at the FBI and CIA. I call on that grand jury to ascertain specifically whether Nunes and Burr and the others mishandled classified information about investigations by the intelligence services of the Trump-Russian connection when Nunes and Burr had conversations with reporters on behalf of the White House. I urge that grand jury to carefully review the actions already publicly acknowledged or reported, such as the contact between General Flynn and the Russian ambassador Sergei Kislyak, such as the meeting between Ambassador Kislyak and the president's son-in-law, such as the involvement of Trump attorney Cohen and the 4 or 5 different stories about that involvement Mr. Cohen has told in delivering a plan to General Flynn to destabilize the government of Ukraine, such as the efforts by Mr. Priebus to influence FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe and FBI Director James Comey to, quote, knock down, unquote, the Trump-Russia story by leaks or announcements to the media. I urge that grand jury to ascertain if these confessed actions already constitute evidence of illegal actions by the Trump campaign, Trump transition team, and Trump administration and representatives of the Russian government, possibly rising to the level of misprision, conspiracy, or espionage, and additionally to ascertain if they already constitute an overarching attempt to cover up these actions and to obstruct justice. Trump's alleged involvement with Russia obscures, perhaps dictates, every other aspect of this existentially dangerous presidency. We have to have answers. The answer we should have gotten from Trump and his gang was simple. It should have been, we have done nothing wrong. We will give the FBI full license to interview anybody and read anything we have. The answer we have gotten from them was instead Trump telling us he, quote, hasn't called Russia in 10 years, and to get on with our lives, and branding as sore losers those who believe he is either a Russian operative or has been compromised by Russian intelligence, and by declaring war on the FBI and on news organizations who publish stories about this topic using leaks from anonymous sources, while we now have Mr. Priebus trying to get the FBI and other intelligence community figures and elected officials like Congressman Nunes and Senator Burr to act as leakers to news organizations to get the news organizations to publish favorable stories about this topic. The answer we should have gotten from Nunes in his role as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee with access to classified intelligence, and Burr in his role as chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee with access to classified intelligence was simple. We will immediately begin open and full investigations, preferably a select joint committee, to determine to what degree Donald Trump knew of or colluded with the Russian government to influence the last presidential election. The answer that we instead have gotten from Mr. Nunes was that there is no evidence of Russian contacts, but, quote, major crimes were committed by those who leaked about Russian contacts, which is an impossibility if there were no contacts. The answer that we have instead gotten from Mr. Nunes and Mr. Burr constitutes the two of them violating their oaths of office and compromising their personal ethics and the codes of honor required of every public service in this nation and completely compromising any congressional investigation. They began to actively serve as press agents to try to influence media coverage in order to suppress investigation and to suppress truth and to suppress our ability to know if our foreign policy, if our domestic policy, if our school policy, if our self-defense policy, if our government is being run by Americans or is being run by Russians. We have to have answers. In short, Senator Burr, Representative Nunes, Mr. Priebus, Mr. Manafort, Director Pompeo, Director Comey, Director McCabe, Mr. Cohen, Mr. Sater, General Flynn, Mr. Kushner, Mr. Trump. We need to know from you if we are still Americans or if we are now merely living in a colony of Russia. Tell it to the grand jury. Resist. Peace.